Hey, what's up, babe? No, I'm just downtown. I was looking at some studio space. What's up? Oh, UPS came? Okay, don't open it. I will be home in like 10 minutes, okay?
This is awkward, but are you Cody with Swoon Creative Collective?
Yeah, I'm Cody. How can I help you?
So your wife did open a box and she saw your new Z-Cam. I'm just wondering if you want to come with me now, or...
My wife's actually a photographer and she buys a ton of gear too, so I think I'll take my chances at home. But thanks anyways.
Is he really gonna make me order an Uber right now? Damn it.
Hey, how's it going, YouTube? Cody Morell here with Swoon Creative Collective again, back in front of the camera to do another gear review, and this time it is for the Z-Cam E2. Before we get into this review, I just want to thank our sponsor. It's pretty crazy we already have a sponsor, but I'm very proud to bring you Gear Focus. Gear Focus is an online marketplace for new and used photography and filmmaking equipment. Gear Focus is set to launch at the end of August, and when you first sign up, you will get 0 seller fees for the first 30 days, and after that, it's only 3.5% once you sell your item. Which is crazy because eBay charges at least 10%, so you will be saving some money with Gear Focus. It is also run and monitored by photographers and videographers, so you can be safe selling or buying gear on this platform. I'll link all their info down in the notes, and you can visit their website, enter your email address to get notified when they first launch, as well as enter their giveaway for 1 of 3 cameras. Check it out, gearfocus.com. All right, moving along with this video, we are gonna get into it with the tiny but very capable Z-Cam E2. Let's get into it. So I finally pulled the trigger on this camera when I saw a deal too good to pass up come up on the Z-Cam Facebook group. And it came with the Z-Cam, a small rig cage, a monitor, a hard drive, speed booster, Sigma 18 to 35. Pretty much all you need to get started shooting right away, because there's nothing worse than buying a camera and then having to wait to have some kind of component to go shoot. Now this camera is very small, but don't let the size of it fool you because it is a very capable camera. It comes in at just over 1.5 pounds, built with all metal and rubber buttons and no plastic really to be found on this camera, so the build quality is great. So I knew this thing was small because I saw it at NAB last year and this year, and I've seen numerous rig photos on the Facebook group I mentioned earlier. But when you pull this thing out of the box, it's still really shocking how small it is and what it's capable of doing. To give you a good size comparison, I put it next to an A7S II, which is a pretty common mirrorless size camera, and you can kind of see that it's not as wide, it's maybe a little deeper, and about the same height, which is pretty insane considering the spec difference between the 2 cameras and the size and form factor they have. So when it comes to rigging this camera up, it's actually kind of fun because you can rig up and dream up your own little creation. And so right now, I'm actually using it without a grip. I have a top handle, but I can mount the FS5 grip to it and still retain that swivel functionality, which is great. But I definitely do plan on getting some kind of different handle just because it is a pain to take it off the FS5 and switch it back and forth and everything. And it's definitely not made for this camera, so switching from the menu and hitting the record button does have a small delay, which can get annoying, so maybe just getting a different handle will solve that. Now getting into the specs I was speaking of earlier, this camera can shoot 4K at 60 frames per second in ProRes LT. It can also shoot 24 frames per second in ProRes 422 and 422 HQ. And this is all 10-bit internally without the use of an external recorder. I know this is a huge deal because you can use a plethora of monitors, and I know a lot of FS5 users were really waiting for the Ninja 5 to have SDI capability so we could record RAW out of that camera, but we were kind of left using the Shogun Inferno. That's a great monitor, and the 7-inch display definitely helps you get focus, and I've had some issues switching between a 7 and a 5. I do find myself kind of squinting and making sure I'm in focus, but definitely it's something you need to get used to. The Z-Cam E2 also shoots 4K at up to 160 frames per second. The 160 frames per second is the 2.4:1 crop, but if you're actually adding black bars, it's not much that you have to crop in a little bit, so no big deal there. This is all internally, which is insane because it's not even a burst, which you would expect. It's all just continuous recording. You could shoot till you run out of battery or your hard drive gets full, but I would considering hitting that record button before you run out of battery. It can also shoot 4K at up to 120 frames per second in Cinema 4K and 4K UHD, and this is all in H.265. Now H.265 in this camera is actually really impressive. The only downside is it is a little taxing on your NLE if you use Premiere like I do. I don't know if it's smoother playback in Final Cut or DaVinci Resolve, but Premiere is my main editing suite that I use. If I have the time, I'll run it through Adobe Media Encoder and change it to ProRes, so that way I have some smoother playback for editing, but I haven't noticed a huge drop in quality between ProRes and H.265 or flexibility with color or anything like that. The Zcam E2 also shoots 240 frames per second in full HD and also has different aspect ratios for using anamorphic glass. Now, a huge deciding factor for this camera when I was considering buying it was how does it do in low light? It's a micro four thirds sensor, like everybody's heard on the internet. Can't shoot low light in micro four thirds, but there's the GH5S and the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. This is no exception. It does amazing in low light. You will get some vertical lines if you're underexposed, but the trick is overexposed by one stop and you're all good. This camera definitely doesn't disappoint in the low light department, and that's something that is amazing considering the specs this camera packs in. And of course, you can use your favorite denoiser like from Red Giant or Neat Video, which I personally use. And pairing this camera with a speed booster and some fast lenses, you definitely should be able to shoot pretty much any situation unless you're in pitch black. After shooting with this camera for a couple months, I can confidently say that it does a little bit better than my FS5 in low light thanks to the dual native ISO. The Zcam E2 comes with 4 available color profiles and Z-Log, which is the only one you can enable wide dynamic range mode, which Zcam advertises it as 16 stops versus 13 stops. And then you also have Hybrid Lock Gamma, which is new with the latest update. You have Z Flat and Rec 709. Now I definitely need to experiment with the other color profiles, but my main color profile with this camera that I go to is Rec 709. It is beautiful. Now Rec 709 with this camera is definitely a lot different than you would expect from any other camera brand, which is just like a no profile kind of look. You can really dial in the settings and bring back like the contrast and the saturation and make it so there's more room in post for you to grade your footage the way you like. Now shooting in Rec 709, you're definitely gonna lose some dynamic range, but I haven't noticed a huge shift. So I use that profile a lot. It gets me a lot closer to where I wanna be. And honestly, I am trying to be a better colorist day by day, but I am not a professional colorist. And there's no harm in not shooting log all the time, right? And if I can have an easier starting off point and get to the image that I actually want in the end, that's great. Now the Zcam E2 definitely comes equipped with a lot of inputs and outputs and includes an HDMI out, 3.5mm headphone and mic jack, 5-pin LEMO XLR, Wi-Fi, a LAN port, 10-pin LEMO sync, and 4-pin LEMO power. Now for storage with this camera, you can use 2 forms of media, and that is CFast, which is really expensive, but is definitely rock solid in this camera because there is an actual door, pops in, closes, or you can also use an SSD with this camera. I do definitely recommend getting a smaller rig cage or some type of lock for your USB-C so that cable doesn't wiggle, because I have read that if that happens, you will drop frames, and that's definitely not good, especially if you're using this camera on a professional production. Now, I definitely test this camera out before you take it on anything that's kind of paid work, but with this camera, it's been very rock solid. I've been using a SanDisk 512GB SSD with this, and I've only run into one issue. Now with this camera, sometimes the SSD can be a little tricky, and what happened last week is I plugged it in, I went to a shoot, I got home, plugged the SSD into the computer, and my computer was asking me to format the drive. Oh, like. Now what I think happened is I formatted it incorrectly or something on my computer. I plugged it into the E2, it let me shoot, but when I got home, it just kept asking me to format the drive. I ended up paying $90 for disk drill, and I was able to recover all of that footage, which was really great, because it was a client that we just got. Now what I recommend doing, and I recommend this with any type of gear, is testing it before you go to the shoot. So make sure your media is working properly and make sure that it's recording the way it should and your computer is reading it properly, and then you won't have any issues down the line. Now the audio on this camera is definitely something I need to test and research further because it has a 5-pin XLR and I'm used to just the full-size XLR with the FS5. Right now I'm actually shooting this on the Zcam E2. I have a Rode NTG2 up here, plugged into a Zoom H4n Pro recording, and honestly, the mic that's built into this camera is amazing. It does great for scratch audio. You can also record audio in super slow motion, and you get some really nice audio to use for sound design if needed. Now, the buttons on this camera are kind of awesome. They're like this nice rubbery, grippy material, and the layout of them is actually perfect in my opinion. And they include a menu button, ISO, shutter, EV, and then OK. And then also down the side, you have user programmable buttons and the power button, which is also the playback button. You can set these to be whatever you want, and that's a great function as well. Now the menu on this camera is actually pretty amazing. If you're used to the A7 III or A7S II, you know those menus can be a nightmare to navigate and even just remember where things are. The menu on the Zcam E2 is laid out thoughtfully, and it doesn't take much time to figure out where everything is and actually remember where those things are. So not much of a learning curve there, which is great because who wants to sit and try to learn a camera for a whole day before they go out and use it? Now this camera uses the very popular Sony NPF batteries, and if you've been into filmmaking for even a couple months, I'm sure you have at least one lying around. I've been mainly using the NPF 970 batteries with this camera, and I get about 4 to 5 hours of battery life, depending on how much we're shooting for the day. You can also buy a lot of different batteries that include D-tap and USB to power your monitor and other accessories, which is also a plus. And these batteries are relatively inexpensive, which is also great as well. Now who do I think this camera is for? I really think this camera is for that user that went out and bought an A7 III, realized they're shooting way more video than they are photo, and they're looking for those pro camera specs that this camera can produce. This camera is $2,000, which is not a small amount of money, but comparing it to other cinema cameras where you can start at like $7,000 and go all the way up to $150,000, this camera is a great starting option for that person that is just beginning their filmmaking career. Now, would I recommend buying the Zcam E2? Absolutely, if you're really serious about your filmmaking career. Well, hey, that's gonna do it for the Zcam E2 review. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving us a thumbs up, leaving a comment, let us know how we did, and also subscribe to the channel. We're definitely gonna be rolling out some more reviews, tips, and tricks, and if you have anything you wanna see in particular, leave a comment down below. And thanks again to Gear Focus for sponsoring our video. We're definitely trying to make this something we do full time, and with the help of you guys, we will get there. So I just wanna thank you all for watching and subscribing, and we'll catch you on the next one. I mean, don't ask me. I was like... I'm dead!
Oh, it was recording this whole time.
What? Oh, it was? Oh my god. What are you gonna do again? Okay.
I get bigger.
That was so awkward.